Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Nice to see you all again. Today I want to talk about my ideas on the subject of false economy in language learning. There's a perfectly understandable trend, especially in this new language learning environment that we have on the internet in this day and age. There is a perfectly understandable and reasonable trend whereby people ask themselves and each other how you can learn a language for free. How can we do this? Traditionally, language learning has at times been rather expensive. People have studied at language schools, they've studied with private tutors, they've studied at universities, and not everyone has the money to avail themselves of all these sometimes quite expensive options. So people naturally ask how they can do this stuff for free, or failing that, how they can do it without spending that much money. That is a perfectly worthwhile set of questions for someone to ask himself. But there are certain false economies, I think, in language learning, and it's worth having a look at them today. Basically, when you decide to learn a language, if you're serious about it and you want to get good at it, by far and away the single greatest cost involved is opportunity cost. By far and away the greatest cost involved is all the stuff that you didn't do because you had to spend all of this time studying languages. Right? When you do A, you can't do B. When you do B, you can't do C. This is called opportunity cost in economics. Well, the opportunity cost of learning a language, especially if it's a difficult language, which means really an alien language, from my perspective, is very substantial. That opportunity cost is very substantial. And if you're talking about some of the languages that I've studied, most obviously Japanese and Chinese, with their very alien and complex writing systems, then you can be talking about an opportunity cost of, if you want to get good, then certainly 5,000 hours. That may seem arbitrary, but I'm talking about roughly 3 hours a day for 5 years. That's one way of thinking about it. That is a hell of a cost. That is a hell of a cost. If you have a full-time job and you work 40 hours a week for 50 weeks a year, say your boss gives you a couple of weeks off, then you're talking about working for 2,000 hours a year. So 5,000 hours to get good at Japanese or Chinese, not only those two languages, but I mention them because I've studied them, right? If you're talking in those terms, then you're talking about an opportunity cost of 2.5 years of paid work, 5,000 hours. If you get paid even £10 an hour, I say pounds because I'm British, then you're talking about £50,000 that you will not now be earning because you spent all of that time watching anime or whatever it is that you're doing to learn, say, Japanese. That is the opportunity cost. That is the main cost. Yes, it's true that you can go to university and study a language there. Yes, it's true that if you go to university, particularly in the States, you can come out after a 4-year bachelor's degree with, I don't know, a couple of $100,000 of student debt. But going to university is special. It's special because we live in societies that sometimes require people who want to be in certain positions to have degrees. It's very naive to think that people who go to university to study Japanese or Chinese or Korean or Arabic or Russian are doing it purely to study those things. They're doing it often because they exist in a certain social class that understands the need for people to go to university to get degrees and that has the money sometimes to actually send, well, I'm talking about the parents really, right? The parents have the money to send their kids to university. Often, not always. I understand that that's not always true. So, you can't just look at the money sunk in a university degree as having been money sunk into language learning. It's more complex than that. So what I want to do here is think about the ways we sink money in language learning that don't have anything to do with obtaining degrees. What does that mean? Well, you can do all sorts of courses in this day and age, of course, online. But most obviously we're talking about working with tutors, perhaps going to a foreign country and studying Japanese in Japan, Korean in Korea, Arabic in the Arabic speaking world. Is it worth spending money on this kind of thing? If we refrain from doing these things because we don't want to spend any money, is that some sort of meaningful economy or is it a false economy? To me, it's fairly clear that in this day and age, with the internet, making a real effort to go abroad and study at a language school is substantially a poor decision if you're thinking about the cost effectiveness of what you're doing. People don't only do this to learn languages, they do it to gain access to foreign countries, foreign cultures, to have some experience of living in the culture where the language they're studying is spoken. If you take all of these things into account, then studying abroad at a language school can, I'm sure, be a tremendously good idea. But if you're just looking at cost effectiveness and language learning, no, it's not a wonderful idea. What happens if we go to the other end of the continuum here and say, to hell with it, I'm doing it online, I've got YouTube, I've got all the resources I need, I'll talk to myself in the mirror, you don't need to practice conversation anyway because Stephen Krashen has proved that it's all about input. I'm going to sit in my concrete bunker watching anime for the next 6 years and then I'll open my mouth and, fluent Japanese will just pour out of me. Is that a reasonable approach? Well, first and foremost, no, because you can't learn to speak without doing a lot of speaking practice. You cannot. I promise you, you cannot. But it may be that sort of approach still has something going for it. You can't just speak your way to fluency. You can't say, I'm going to speak for 3 hours a day in Mongolian and 2 years from now I'll be fluent. How are you going to speak it if you don't know anything about it? How are you going to speak it if you don't have any vocabulary, if you don't know how it works, if you haven't spent a lot of time marinating yourself in the language? That ain't going to work either. In addition to that, there's a great naivety in thinking that you're going to figure out everything you need to figure out about a language by immersing. When you're trying to learn a language that's alien in particular, there's a lot of stuff that your brain is not going to figure out. Once you're an adult, once you're in your late teens, you've got to be kidding, man. You really think that you're just going to extract the grammar of Japanese from a lot of input? You think you're going to pick up on all the subtleties that you need to know to even be moderately good at Japanese just from a load of input and maybe, a certain amount of grammar reference here and there, a certain amount of grammar instruction. It is hard. It is hard to figure out how languages work. It is very hard sometimes to figure out how they're pronounced. It is very difficult to know what you're doing right and what you're not doing right with respect to pronunciation. When you actually start trying to speak a language, you will discover that all the stuff that you thought you knew because, hey, you understood it when they said it in that anime, that stuff is not going to come out of your mouth the way you want it to. You're going to talk quite a frightening amount of utter garbage. You will feel like someone has surgically removed half of your brain when you actually start trying to speak the language that you want to speak. Now, obviously, these are complex subjects, but I feel like I should offer some sort of advice. And my advice in this day and age is that you should find high quality, knowledgeable conversation partners who have real incentives to correct you and help you and offer you advice. And realistically speaking, that means that you're probably going to have to pay teachers to work with you and to help you improve. Now, if you're Spanish and you want to learn Portuguese, you probably don't need that. You can probably just read a bit of stuff, listen to a bit of stuff, pay a little bit of attention to the differences between those two languages, and gradually sort of blag your way to fluency. But if you're Spanish and you want to learn Mandarin Chinese, then you're in a very different situation. You're going to need feedback, you're going to need to ask questions, you're going to need to be able to say, why is this word here and not there? Why did you say this like this here and that like there, that like that there? Why are there all these stupid little words that don't seem to make sense and don't mean anything? How is it that you know that this is in the past despite the fact that there's no past tense marker? How does this stuff work? Your brain is going to have to solve a lot of problems. And although there may be unusually talented people who can figure out nearly everything about the grammar of a language with enough exposure and enough effort, the chances are you're not one of those people. The chances are I'm not one of those people. And even if you are, what's the point of smashing your head against a wall for 20 hours learning X amount of Chinese in some sense, when you could perhaps have done a couple of hours with with a capable, competent tutor and ask them what was going on. One of the things that I most enjoy when I teach Japanese is when students come in with questions that they have accumulated throughout the course of their own independent studies. And this is something, I keep seeing this thing, or I keep hearing this thing, it comes up over and over again, but I just can't figure it out. Well, normally I can tell them what it is, and we can talk about it, and I can give them different examples of how it works, and then it clicks. And then they go back to their listening, or they go back to their reading, and they say, damn, yeah, now that I've heard that explanation, yeah, I can see what's going on. It's a real false economy, I think, to refrain from doing that kind of thing. Don't let your pride get too caught up in it. There's no virtue in studying a language by yourself just so you can say you studied it by yourself. I never ask questions, I never look for help. Why not? I do. I've spent about 6,500 hours studying, practicing, learning Russian, all in. If I had earned £10 an hour, I would have earned £65,000, right? And earning £10 an hour, that's not that much, right, for a qualified person. That's the opportunity cost. I've probably done about 1,000 hours, let's say 1,000 for the sake of argument, of paid conversation practice with people who corrected me and helped me because it was their job and they took it seriously and that's what they were there for. And I shudder to think what it would have been like learning Russian without that. Now, how much did it cost me? Let's say it cost me about $8,000. Russian you can study relatively cheaply on the whole. $9,000, something like that. What's that? Call it 7,000 quid, right? My opportunity cost in studying Russian has been £65,000 if I would have earned £10 an hour. Yeah. My direct financial outlay has been 7,000. It's quite small. It's quite small compared to the 65 grand that I have in the way of an opportunity cost. So don't get fixated on trying to do this stuff for free. No, you don't necessarily want to go to university. No, you don't necessarily want to shoot off to Japan and pay for language instruction that might often not be of a particularly good quality. But for God's sake, find someone and talk to them and ask them. They can be a native, they can be a non-native, you can work with both. As you get better and better at the language in question, you'll want to move from non-natives like me to natives. But find someone who can help you and be prepared to pay them if necessary, because it's a good use of money. And trying to avoid it is in my opinion, a serious false economy. Anyway, that's it. That's all I wanted to say today. Thanks very much. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.